Hi everyone, this is Christine Brinker with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and I'm helping to facilitate this webinar on cannabis energy efficiency policies and programs. We're just giving it another minute for people to trail in, so hold tight for a second. Okay, hello again everyone. This is Christine Brinker with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, and I'm helping Neil Colway facilitate this webinar on cannabis energy efficiency policies and programs. It looks like people have stopped filtering in. It kind of reminds me of listening to when your popcorn is done popping, so let's get going. We are going to record this webinar and we will be able to share the slides afterward. And a second reminder, if you have questions that come up, type those into the question box and then we'll take all of those at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Neil Colway, who will introduce the call and the speakers and give us an introduction and an overview of the topic. Okay, Neil, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Neil Colway, the Industrial Program Director for SWEEP, the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. SWEEP promotes energy efficiency policies and programs in 6 Southwest states, from Nevada to Colorado. We have programs involving utilities, buildings, industry, and clean transportation. Here's our other speakers today. I'm going to start by talking about some of the energy consumption issues with indoor cannabis in particular, and some of the energy efficiency opportunities. Derek is going to talk about state and local policies and the importance of benchmarking. Jacob is going to talk about voluntary standards and certifications. And then finally, we have Adam with the Energy Trust to talk about some of their offerings and successes with the cannabis sector. Growing cannabis indoors is a pretty energy-intensive operation. It's about 10 times as intensive on a square footage basis as a typical office building in the Southwest, but only about 1/3 to 50% as intensive as a typical data center. And as a percentage of total operating costs, energy is about 20 to 40% for indoor cannabis grows, which is pretty significant. And by comparison, a typical medium or larger brewery has about 6 to 12 of total operating costs accounted for by energy. This shows the trend in Colorado of increasing marijuana sales since we legalized recreational a few years ago, probably similar to the trend that we'll see in some of the newer states. Michigan is the newest state to legalize recreational marijuana, and Illinois apparently may join the club later in 2019. Denver produces about 60% of the marijuana consumed in Colorado, mostly with indoor grows, and the cannabis sector now accounts for about 4% of Denver's total electricity consumption, which is pretty significant. On the other hand, if you look at the U.S. as a whole, even including an assumption or some estimate for the illegal market, cannabis is only about 0.1% of total electricity consumption, so not that much. By comparison, data centers are about 1.8% of total electricity consumption in the U.S. So I think the point here is that for states that legalize recreational marijuana, there may be some local impacts, and so that's something to watch out for. So let's talk about the energy efficiency opportunities. This pie chart, which comes from Oregon, but is pretty good representation, I think, for the average for any indoor grow in the U.S., shows that most of the electricity is for lighting, about 55%, and then we have cooling and dehumidification and ventilation together about 40%, and so that's an important area to look at as well. In case you're not that familiar with growing marijuana, there's three main stages. There's the germination or mothering stage, and the vegetative stage, and the flowering stage. And the vegetative and flower stages account for by far the most energy, about 33% for vegetative and about 60% for the flower stage. That's because longer periods of time and much more intensive lighting, and in the case of flower, the more strict humidity requirements. It's important to have a strategy for improving energy use that involves meaningful metrics and goals. The most helpful goal from a business standpoint is to reduce energy consumption per gram or per pound of product, rather than just talking about somehow trying to reduce the total energy consumption. And it's important to keep in mind that the best opportunities are in the design phase. Once a grow is up and running, retrofits are difficult, although some retrofits do happen, especially involving lighting, as Adam will discuss later. So you've all probably heard about LED lighting. LEDs work very well for veg rooms, and they can also work well for flower rooms, but it's not quite a slam dunk for flower rooms. There's more concerns about production. And in comparing lighting efficiency for indoor agriculture or cannabis, it's important to talk about photosynthetically active radiation. And when we compare lighting fixtures, we talk about the photon efficacy, micromoles per joule or micromoles per kilowatt hour. The two types of fixtures with the highest efficacy for the flower rooms are double-ended HPS, high pressure sodium, or LEDs. They both have some advantages. The double-ended HPS is very well accepted. They work very well, and they're much cheaper than LEDs, and they have almost as good of the efficacy. And LEDs, some of them have a little higher efficacy, and they're dimmable and have a few other potential advantages. Some growers are starting to experiment with hybrids of both of those two. Now let's talk about HVAC. It's important to understand the dehumidification aspects, which are challenging for indoor agriculture. So I want to make 2 points about standalone dehumidifiers. First of all, some grows have rooftop air conditioning units with only electric reheat to accomplish their dehumidification. That is very inefficient. So compared to that, having a standalone dehumidifier like the one shown here at the end of the aisle in this flower room is a big improvement. And the second point is that when the lights are on and the dehumidifier is running, it does add heat to the room, and that does add to the cooling load. And so for, let's say, medium-sized or larger grows, there are a couple options to get around that. The first one being chilled water systems, like the one shown here. And the other option is rooftop air conditioning units with hot gas reheat, basically heat recovery from the condenser to accomplish the reheat rather than electric resistance. The other advantage of chilled water is you can do free cooling in the cooler months using the cool outdoor air to cool the water rather than the chiller system. So that's very efficient. So altogether, all these aspects shown here for a well-designed and operated indoor grow, they can save up to 40% per gram of flower compared to a standard indoor grow. So that's pretty significant savings potential. And at least in Colorado, greenhouses, a well-designed and operated greenhouse can save 60 to 70% of the energy compared to a standard indoor grow. That's because they can, of course, use the light from the sun, and they can also take advantage of evaporative cooling, which is much more efficient than refrigerant-based cooling. Here's a message from our partners, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. They're interested in developing a Midwest Cannabis Working Group. They'd like to invite utilities, local governments, regulators, and grow facilities to have some goals. And if you're interested, please contact Molly Graham at the address shown here. And I just want to mention the excellent sweep report, a budding opportunity, energy efficiency best practices, and it's available on our website, and that's my contact info. And now I'd like to turn it over to Derek Smith of the Resource Innovation Institute.
All right, thank you, Neil. That was a great overview. Hello, everybody. I'm going to open my screen here. Is that coming through?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you for the opportunity, Neil. Pleasure to be with you all this morning. My name is Derek Smith. I'm with Resource Innovation Institute. We're a nonprofit market transformation organization based in Portland, Oregon. We essentially bring together cannabis cultivators and operators, the supply chain, governments, and utilities to coordinate activities and accelerate conservation. How do I advance the slide? I apologize. Christine, how do I advance the slide?
Yep. If it's not working, I can load it on my computer and advance it for you. Is it stuck?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm hitting the space bar and the arrow. It doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, yep. Hold on one second.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, thanks. I'll just keep this brief. I mean, we've been around for 3 years as a nonprofit, stakeholder-driven, working on market transformation. We got a great board that includes ACEEE and the California Cannabis Industry Association, and we're fortunate to have broad stakeholder input. Late last year, we released a report in partnership with New Frontier Data, one of the largest data analytics firms in the cannabis industry. And without going into a ton of detail, which it has, but essentially we're seeing that electricity increases are just continuing as this market continues to escalate. And so that's the trend we're on unless we all do something about it. Some benchmarks that we have found based on the analysis of in that report of about 100 farms, their utility bills, their production records, detailed information that they submitted to us on lighting, HVAC, canopy size, etc. We're finding that the cannabis grown today is very different from the cannabis grown in the past, and what you might think of as a small basement, filled with old technology that wasn't necessarily designed for cannabis cultivation. And so we're learning all of these ways that cannabis is grown, and we're beginning to have enough data to create benchmarks on both electricity intensity, which is shown here, and you can see the range is very dramatic with outdoor cultivation having even a different scale to look at kilowatt hour per square foot of flowering canopy. And it's essentially a 500x difference between the ways you can cultivate this plant based on the setting. In terms of grams per kilowatt hour, as Neil mentioned, this is what we're finding in the data set that we've got. A lot more detail to get into there. I'll just leave it at that and just say that through all this data, we're able to begin to validate efficient technologies and techniques, which will be really important to informing solutions going forward. So in the big picture, what RII is trying to do is take these old school facilities to more new school facilities and help cultivation operations, no matter which way they're doing it, to do it more efficiently. You know, greenhouses, as Neil mentioned, is also another option with light deprivation curtains and artificial lights that are supplementing the sun to get more harvests throughout the year. We're seeing a lot more LEDs in greenhouses. And then, of course, there's regenerative farming practices, which Jacob works a lot in, which are, you know, putting carbon back into the soil and really not using anywhere near the amount of electricity in other sectors. But so what needs to happen is to essentially track the impacts of all these different forms of cultivation and make sure that we're setting good policy that is making sense. We really see that as a vision that cannabis really is an incubation platform for the way agriculture is going to be done in the future. And we're seeing two models that can move us toward low carbon cultivation emerge. Obviously, the regenerative outdoor farms, as well as these hyper efficient, vertically stacked, automated facilities that are beginning to emerge as cost pressures and global scale come to play. Now, having said all that, there are critical challenges to transform this market and I'll just point out three main ones that we see. One, lack of data. Again, we're beginning to have data, but we need a lot more data to really understand. Obviously, history of and a culture of secrecy where people didn't want to share their best practices, right, for fear of getting caught, and that is still embedded in the industry. And you know, this belief that their efficiency are trade secrets, right, and we're trying to bust through that. There's also no existing policies or codes that really apply directly to plants with, excuse me, buildings with plants in them. You cannot just take approaches to driving regulation or code or policies that work for buildings with humans in them and try to apply them to a horticultural production facility. And then, of course, we see inconsistent engagement by utilities and governments because of the concerns of federal illegality. So we really believe that there's three areas that we all need to focus on to move toward an energy efficient, low carbon cannabis cultivation model or models: data, policy, and education. And I'm going to go through just briefly what our approach is. Of course, there's a bunch of different approaches that we can all work in these areas and coordinate together. We have a data platform that is called the Cannabis Power Score. And what it does is it was informed by our technical advisory committee of manufacturers, top cultivators from multiple states, architects, engineers, contractors, essentially saying what are the data points that express the energy impact of a cultivation facility, and what's a user experience that could get growers to trust that this data is not going to be pay to play and it's going to be held in confidence and shared in the aggregate with governments and utilities and the supply chain, so that everybody can help understand the industry a little bit better and help drive data-driven solutions, which again we think are really important. And I'll just point out the bottom left, what we're finding in the through the Cannabis Power Score data is, you know, things like the productivity improvements in terms of grams per kilowatt hour consumed of LEDs over HPS. I'll just show you a couple quick case studies that come out of the Power Score, just so you have a sense of the range of performance of these facilities. This is pretty old school. This would be essentially a basement blown up to 10,000 plus square feet. Very old school, very inefficient, low scoring HID lights pretty much everywhere, inefficient HVAC. And you compare that to another indoor facility, which is using LED lights and had the HVAC equipment sized to the heat load of those LED lights versus, you know, it's very difficult to figure out how to retrofit once you've got obviously HVAC systems sized, and then you go to a lower reheat model. So just to jump into policy then and make this connection between data and policy, we really think that we need more data to drive good policy. We do believe that there is a model that's emerging out of our experience in Massachusetts, where they were the first state to regulate electricity use and carbon impact. Initially started with the approach of looking at how you would regulate a commercial or office building and tried to apply that here. And through a stakeholder process that we were able to help facilitate, we brought in the notion of photon efficacy and the Design Lights Consortium horticultural lighting standard that is now in the market, and the qualified products list is becoming available, and hopefully we're moving toward more. But the other points of the policy that I think are sort of a template are requirement for ongoing data collection, increasingly stringent targets over time as we understand from that data what the solutions are, exemptions for renewables, and for sure coordinated activities between governments and utilities on incentives, and ensuring that there's education and best practices and innovation that are supported through that process. There's also local codes or local policies that are really important, but I'll leave that for conversation. So the final piece, data policy education, is education. And what the industry is suffering from is a lack of peer-reviewed guidance. And so we're beginning to pull together some peer-reviewed materials. This cultivating cannabis with LED lighting is something we're releasing today and I'm in Vegas at a cultivator conference, and we've got some best practices guides coming up, and we're forming partnerships to come out with a water report later this year to follow on our energy report. We also create these events, and I'll just throw this one out there and show and thank Adam and Energy Trust for their leadership in sponsoring venues like these that are creating these dialogues and exchanges on best practices. We hope to do these in other markets in the country. And I'll just close by saying that these are recommendations we have on the research and support that needs to happen out there by governments and utilities. There's a long list here. Hopefully some of this comes out in conversation. And my contact info is here if anybody would like to contact us. We have some funding to help push out these policy concepts, and we're happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Derek. Handing it off. And I am Jacob Politzer with the Cannabis Conservancy. And give me 1 second. And today I'll be talking about cannabis sustainability certifications, what's available, the benefits, goals, and the importance of kind of third-party certification and auditing. I co-founded the Cannabis Conservancy 4 years ago to focus exclusively on sustainability, stewardship in the cannabis space, to try to move the industry towards being more responsible industry as regards to resource use. So the benefits of sustainable certification that we've been seeing as we've been rolling this out over the last 4 years is really, you have operational oversight, which is mainly the producers that use verifiable, documented processes tend to have better, more well-run and sustainable facilities that can consistently produce, high-quality cannabis. What we've seen is that by implementing and maintaining standard operating procedures, employee training, producers will ensure that their growing methods are properly followed, limiting costly mistakes, and also allows for more thorough oversight. It's not just the equipment that is in a facility, but also how that facility is used, how that equipment is used by employees. We're also seeing cost savings. A lot of studies have been done with how companies around the world have incorporated sustainable practices, and they found that most of them are reducing their operating costs by an average of 23%. Our preliminary research has shown a 6% give or take reduction after 1 year while going through a sustainability certification. And really that's because it requires growers to measure and monitor the resource consumption, which leads to better understanding of material flows, resource use hotspots throughout their system. specifically the energy tool, the power score that Derek was just talking about is a great tool for that end. And by having these metrics, management can make better, more informed, proactive decision as things relate to their effects on yield and quality. Also, market differentiation is a big point. There's a lot of greenwashing going on within the cannabis industry. And so by having a certification, you are building consumer trust and loyalty. We're also seeing that you're kind of getting that top shelf status, which is where you want to be in this ever increasing competitive marketplace and commanding premium prices as well, because you are showing that you're growing in a more sustainable way, but also you have product integrity, which really goes down to risk mitigation. And by having an annual audit and by having documentation and record keeping, you are having a more thorough oversight of your process and supply chain. And that will relate to product integrity, but also will help reduce premium costs with insurance and help with consumer investor confidence and things like that. So essentially, goals of sustainability certification or goals of sustainability in general is to promote stewardship. And by that, we really mean environmental stewardship, which we'd say is the responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices. And what we're really trying to do is promote a responsibility on the farmers to understand, recognize, and mitigate what their environmental impacts are, and realize that they're just one component in a much larger industry. And it's not just specifically, what their impacts is, but the collective of everyone going on. And then education and knowledge sharing, which is really, I think, one of the bigger components of this, is to demonstrate that you have implemented, appropriate sustainability procedures in place in your cultivation facility, but then also sharing that amongst other farmers. And through all of these different certifications, most of them have gone through, a third-party hosted industry engagement process, and that's where that picture is from one of the in-person meetings we had with a collection of seasoned growers in Northern California. And really, what we're trying to do is, by the industry for the industry type standards. Before I get into kind of product certification, which is what we do, I wanted to mention that there's also equipment testing that's coming online. The biggest one that Derek had mentioned was the Design Light Consortium, and they're in the process of releasing their horticultural lighting standard. And specifically what they focus on is LEDs. It's a PPF-based metric, photosynthetic photon flux based. And they also test the driver of all of these units. They only look at AC line voltages and LED fixtures at the moment, as well as the lifetime. So this is really trying to bring consumer confidence into the LED space, because it had a bit of a stutter step at the beginning with lights not necessarily living up to the promise. The biggest thing to take away from what DLC is doing is that they're photosynthetic photon efficacy is set at 1.9 micromoles per joule or greater. So you can really kind of rest assured by looking at what they release that you'll know you're getting a quality and effective piece of equipment. And then on the other side, pulling from regular ad, we have the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign has a bioenvironmental and structural systems laboratory known as BESS that does agricultural ventilation fans. So they have over 800 fans that they've tested on their website, which is bess.illinois.edu. And specifically, they're mostly looking at greenhouses, but it is searchable by size, airflow, ventilation efficiency, and manufacturing. So you can use that as a starting point to look at what type of fans, ventilation fans specifically, to include in your build out or retrofit. So these are the certifications that are available right now through the industry. Most of them focus on organic certifications, since the USDA controls the American organics system and does not offer that for cannabis, though it will be offered for hemp, or it is currently offered for hemp right now. The one thing to know about USDA organics in general is that they do not allow for indoor cultivation. The EU and Canada do have new provisions to allow for supplemental lighting in more of a greenhouse type process. And their requirements around that is that you're allowed to use it for extended daylight, specifically in autumn, winter, and early spring. And you're allowed to use it for overcast days as well, but you should not exceed par values for your country. So you're not really supposed to be using that to enhance growing environments above what would be naturally occurring. And then we have sustainability certifications and beyond. And Simply Certified and Sun and Earth are two certifications that we oversee at the Cannabis Conservancy. But with Sun and Earth, we partnered with Certified Kind to also help with the overseeing and rollout of that standard. So for the Simply Eco Certified, which we just rebranded recently, we look at 7 different pillars, really trying to take a holistic approach to sustainability. And within that, we look at policy and implementation, land and infrastructure, depending on if you're indoor, greenhouse, or outdoor facility, water, energy, waste. We also look at harvesting and processing, and then cultivation is akin to kind of organic cultivation for what we're doing. So since we are in an energy efficiency webinar, I thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of our energy requirements and how we're looking at that. So we do have 13 standards that oversee energy, kind of going along with the holistic approach. We're really focusing on policies that are in place, the procedures that are followed, the employees and how they're trained, kind of the human capital of it all, as well as the equipment. We have 13 standards with 36 substandards, and we require annual energy audits. We require grows to measure and monitor what their benchmarks are, akin to what the Energy Power Score is calculating for growers. We also realize that building is an important factor as well, specifically for indoor grow. So insulation, seals, how is that building being, is there a facility management plan? We look at, equipment and policies and procedures are super important. Making sure that there's record keeping, documentation of when things are done. There's trainings of employees. There's maintenance schedules, which is usually missed in a lot of grows. And then we look at all of the equipment and control set points when it comes to climate control, lighting, circulation, and fuel consumption. And the last thing I'll talk about is the new Sun and Earth certification that we have rolled out. This is really a regenerative organic certification, and was the impetus behind this was realizing that the USDA organic certification as it stands is really being watered down with industry and really not going far enough. And so there's 3 pillars that we look at for that, which is earth care and cultivation. How are they being cultivated? This picture is, pretty standard for the different types of grows that we're looking at. And with that, specifically regarding energy, we require grows be sun-grown. And we do have a caveat carve-out to allow for supplemental lighting as it relates to propagation. So you can use supplemental lighting to keep your mothers alive and to start your clones, as well as to ensure that transplants remain in the vegetative state, depending really on your latitude and lighting and how many harvest cycles you're trying to get. So if you're trying to do more than one and you're planting in the late late fall, or really, towards the end of summer, we do allow for a little bit of supplemental light to make sure that as soon as you plant, those clones into the ground, they're not immediately going to start flowering. And with this also, we look at the human empowerment, which is kind of a fair trade aspect, as well as community engagement. So there's a big knowledge sharing component to that, to really have growers learn from other growers, so they can be assured in the metrics they might, not metrics, but methodology and different grow practices that they might implement are, have been tried before. And with that, I will pass it along to Adam.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. My name's Adam Bartini. I'm a senior program manager with Energy Trust of Oregon's industry and agriculture sector, and I'm here to discuss how we serve the cannabis industry and help customers to reduce the energy consumption growing cannabis. Very quick agenda here. I'm just going to give a little background about who Energy Trust is, how we've served the cannabis industry in the past, a little bit about our offerings, some high-level project history, and then some ultra-quick success stories. So for those who are unfamiliar with what we do, we are an independent nonprofit organization. We serve the customers in that top right gray box, and we provide information, cash incentives, technical services to the 1.5 million customers in the state. We're trying to help them to save energy in their homes, their businesses, their farms, and to invest in small-scale renewable energy projects. We serve about 75% of Oregon's electric customers and 88% of the gas customers. So Energy Trust began serving medical growers back in 2012 and adult use or recreational growers in 2016. We made the determination several years ago that despite the federal prohibition, as legal Oregon businesses, cannabis producers were entitled to the same Energy Trust offerings as any other ratepayer. The one caveat is now with the adult use that we do check for the proper licensing before we will release any incentives. We did make the very conscious decision not to develop any special offerings or incentives for cannabis. It's business as usual with what we have for other industries. That was just to take a wait and see approach, and it's paid off. Likewise, our outreach mechanisms are all the same as other industries as well. We do some one-on-one customer delivery, particularly for our larger custom projects. And then we have our vendor and manufacturer channels, which particularly for LED lights, we've seen, the vast majority of our projects are actually coming through the manufacturers, which is a unique thing to the cannabis industry. We have a variety of other advertising options. I won't go into all the details on that now, but also pretty similar to what we'll do for other industries. Our project activity really dramatically increased in late 2016 with the adult use legalization. We suspect that we may have seen a peak in savings last year. The OLCC, the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, has a licensing freeze on cannabis producers right now. There's a large market oversupply that many of you, I'm sure, have read about. And to this point, we're not seeing, of course, the new growers. We're seeing mostly retrofits at this point. So in terms of our offerings, I have lighting listed first. That is the vast majority of what we're doing for the cannabis industry. It's at 25 cents per kilowatt hour, up to about half of the project cost. We have a similar incentive or the same incentive on the custom side, and that's for your HVAC, dehumidification. We've done a couple of air purification projects, but dehumidification has been the number one. We do provide the full cost of our technical studies that are used to analyze whatever the custom energy efficiency project opportunity is. There's no cost to the customer for any of the site visits that we do or any of the technical services that we provide. We do this we want to make it easy for the customer to participate. We don't want to put any barriers in place because there's already enough of them in this industry. And we also have a set of prescriptive greenhouse and installation measures that we haven't seen the uptake on to this point, but we're still hoping that we can do that in the future. We pay those at $2 per therm, again, up to 50% of eligible project costs. In terms of these studies that we provide for lighting, we don't provide an actual study, but we are providing some technical services to help them. We have a lighting calculator tool that's used to determine the energy savings. There's some other criteria that need to be met to qualify for incentives, but we haven't found that it's justified a full technical study. But something that for all of our projects that we do, we communicate up front with parties that we're not experts in growing cannabis. We can't vouch for any particular lighting product that it's going to, grow the cannabis that they want, give them the yield that they want or the quality that they want. That's up to the growers. We're just there to help out with, how that improvement is going to help on their energy bill. This is a summary of our projects to date. Really took off again in late 2016, about 30 million kilowatt hours saved. As you can see, the vast majority from lighting. Healthy sum that we've paid out at this point, about $25,000 average project. And for that 30 million kilowatt hours saved, we saw 9 million of that in 2017 and 18 million in 2018. So again, that's likely going to be the peak. We've got about 7 million kilowatt hours in our 2019 pipeline right now. And the majority of the lighting projects, as you see, have been LED, and at this point are mostly retrofits. All right, so just wanted to give some really quick success stories here. Deschutes Growery did 100% LED, all phases of growth, and this is one of the larger projects that we've done for the cannabis industry. You see the numbers there. I won't read those back to you. Part of that really high project cost is due to that solar PV system that they put in to help offset some of their usage. This was a project, we're kind of showing the aggregate numbers here. This was a 3-phase project. And that was something that, the phasing approach is something that we've encouraged from the beginning, particularly with LED lights. There's a lot of skepticism, especially a few years ago about them. So we encourage growers to do a little bit at a time and see if it's producing the quality that you need, and then make further investments from there. And I think, given the capital budget constraints a lot of growers have that also work for that reason, we verified this final phase in 2018. And another thing that's unique about this project is that they've got a mobile racking system that allows them to stack up to 4 tiers of plants. Of course, with LEDs, they emit a lot less heat, so the plants can get much closer to the fixtures. So it's, with the square footage limitations growers have with the licenses in Oregon, this helps them to maximize the square footage of their facility. So Cloud Cover Cannabis, this is a big HVAC project, one of the larger ones we've done. And as Neil mentioned, rooftop units are kind of the baseline, and some separate dehumidification units. In this particular case, it's a package unit, and with that hot gas reheat technology, it allows them to not even need the dehumidifiers in this case. And the rooftop units also have variable speed fans to help save additional energy. And this customer is very happy with this project, obviously saving money on the utility bill, but the quality control for the product's also there. They've reported that they can consistently control temperature and humidity set points to within just a few tenths of their target. So the system's really delivering on what they're looking for. And then finally, this is wanted to include this. This is a little bit more representative of the average project that we do, about $20,000 incentive payment here. Again, this is taking the phased approach, doing a little bit at a time to see how the LEDs work. This particular project was both in the veg and flower spaces. For this, we assumed a combination of 400 watt and 1,000 watt metal halide for the veg phase, and then 1,000 watt HPS for flower, and that is still generally the baseline that we're assuming on our lighting projects, unless a grower is bringing a couple of different options to us where they say, okay, we want to do this one option or we want to do the more efficient, and then we'll look at an incremental cost between the two and the incremental energy savings between the two. And that is my presentation. I've included a website here that will give more detail on our cannabis incentives, and then there's a number of other success stories on the website. You can get a little bit more detail than I just shared now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you also to Jacob, Derek, and Neil. That's the end of our formal presentation, so let's move on to some questions and answers. We have a handful of questions that came out, so let me shoot those to all of you speakers. Starting with, what do you think about utilizing solar to both reduce operating costs as well as to promote clean, sustainable energy?
Adam, do you want to start?
Go ahead. I think it's great, but I mean, I think Adam might be able to address that more technically.
Yeah, it's obviously something that we encourage. You know, it's a little bit of a tricky one for me in my role because we're on the energy efficiency side of Energy Trust, and then we have the renewable side. And so, you know, PV is it's great, and the Deschutes Growery is offsetting a relatively small portion of their total energy use. So it is a very big investment given how energy intensive it is to grow cannabis. You need a pretty sizable investment to offset a large percentage of that usage. So it's not going to be for every grower. It's going to be somebody who's really got a lot of capital to invest. But it's obviously something that we love to see, and we'll use as a success story every time.
And I'll just point out that we held a solar event last month, thanks to Energy Trust, and yeah, there are a number of growers that are definitely looking at it. Financing solutions are coming to pass, and figuring out ways to enable you know, the tax deductions to be taken through, you know, creatively organizing a different company that's not cannabis who can claim those credits. There's some difficulties because of the federal illegality, but they're achievable, and certainly in a small load farm, like an outdoor farm that's maybe doing a little bit of artificial lighting, that would be highly appropriate. And the history of solar actually was, to some degree, started out by cannabis cultivators in Northern California who could buy it because of the electricity grid constraints, and the Solar Living Center up in Mendocino, ironically.
Great. Now let's turn to a lighting question. The question says, I'm seeing increasing numbers of ceramic metal halides when evaluating grow facilities. Some growers like them best because they're more efficient than the high pressure sodium, but give better yields than LEDs. Will these take off in your opinion?
Adam, do you want to take that, or? I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I think CMHs are a common light type that is used. I don't necessarily see it increasing. I think the biggest increases are coming from LED. But, you know, I think we need more study to really understand the overall impacts of different lighting types. We will have the ability to look at those key metrics across a range of facilities in different climate zones, different structures, using different light types, different pairings with different HVAC systems, and really actually begin to dial into what is the most efficient method. Yeah, and I would say we don't necessarily know that in every environment yet.
This is Adam from Energy Trust, and I'd agree with what Derek just said. We definitely are seeing a little bit more uptake in the LEDs. We did see some ceramics early on, particularly in the those checkerboard patterns with double-ended HPS. but not as much. I wouldn't say we're seeing an increasing trend, no.
Yeah, I'd say we're seeing it a little bit more adaptability of that in the vegetative state. If growers are looking at changing out their older lights in the veg state for an indoor facility, just because the cost is a lot cheaper than retrofitting with LED. So we see that the financial, capital cost being kind of the main decision maker driver of those, because it does have a favorable light spectrum for vegetative plants.
Okay, great. And now 2 questions for you, Adam. The first is, do you think that the oversupply conditions that the cannabis industry is seeing in Oregon may result in the industry increasing its consideration of energy efficiency measures as a way to maintain profitability and reduce operating costs?
Yes, definitely. We are seeing that. We're hearing that from growers. Cost competition is becoming increasingly important. I think, as Neil mentioned in his presentation, with energy costs being such a large percentage of the overall bottom line, we definitely are seeing that. It was a message we were trying to get out early, when people were developing their businesses and building out their infrastructure. There was a lot of excitement at that time. I think there was a lot of rush just to get to the market and get that piece of the market share. So there weren't as many folks calling us, but yeah, I definitely see that. We see that happening now and expect to see that going forward in Oregon.
And this is Derek. I can just add that California's got a relatively similar situation, and actually a lot of states have these challenges between the illicit market and the regulated market. And I'll just point out that the conversation in Oregon, especially at the legislature level, is really focused on preparing the state to export. And there's a little bit of a nuance with how other states are approaching the challenges of overconsumption, or in Oregon, what we would say is it's not an overconsumption problem, it's actually a market access problem, which is a political problem. And there would not be overconsumption if there was federal regulation. And some of these little false economies would be worked out, right? And so what's interesting is, as other states talk about doing more law enforcement and shutdown of illicit operations, which is a policy approach, Oregon is more focused on supporting its regulated farms to prepare for export, and in particular looking at these certification systems and how they can create an opportunity for them to be producing most efficiently so they can compete on that global stage. And that's definitely something I would say to other markets, to be looking into that sort of mindset, as well as understanding the risk that there may be some stranded assets out there. If people want Oregon or California weed, which is overproduced or has a market access problem, they may prefer that over whatever infrastructure is set up in their local state for local producers, in warehouses where electricity rates are much higher, right? So there's going to be a production shift as federal regulation happens and as globalization continues to occur. And it's something to consider in policy development.
I think we have some of that efficiency competition or going on in Colorado with the market being tight. Jacob, do you want to say anything about your impressions on that?
Yeah, just say as where things stand right now in almost every established market, or it's been around for more than a couple years. Right now, what we recommend is you need to get your production costs down to $350 or below per pound to stay competitive within the market. And that's a steep curve from what it was, last year to 2 years ago. But yes, definitely the competitive marketplace, the not being able to sell out of state, everything kind of Derek had mentioned, are all factors into this. But for the foreseeable future, that's not necessarily going to change. So to maintain, and especially with 280E policies and not being able to take, deductions outside of cost of goods, it's going to be the biggest factor in moving towards energy efficient, sustainable practices is that cost and getting that cost down.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one more?
Okay. And yeah, with our last 5 minutes or so, let's see if we can do a lightning round with, say, just a few sentences or less. A lighting question. Adam, how does the Energy Trust plan to engage with the new DLC lighting spec in your future programs?
Yeah, it's something we're keeping a close eye on. We haven't adopted it yet, but we do rely heavily on the DLC list for human-centric lighting. We have for many years, so that is definitely an organization that we trust. So that's all I can say. I'm not too close to the details on that, but I do know that we are looking at it closely.
Okay, now a heating question. In Massachusetts, we hear a lot about the need for natural gas for cannabis growing for heating, and it's one of the drivers for pipeline expansion. Can you say what you consider to be the most efficient heating sources and practices?
I would say that what we're seeing, and this is not necessarily specific to Massachusetts, but in general, as far as it goes to heating, you really want to focus on root zone heating. That's going to allow you to have a greater range of, atmospheric climate control. You don't need to heat the entire facility down or up as much if you have good root zone heating. So we definitely look into that and there's a lot of different ways you can do that, either through forced air under the beds, hot air coil tubing placed within the beds as they're built or on the floor. It depends on your setup, but definitely target heating or insulation of pots towards the root zone will allow for a greater, more efficient practices. And then I guess it really depends on if you're an indoor, outdoor or greenhouse facility, how you're going to go about heating that. Distributive heating, if you're located in an industrial area, is always a possibility, and we're seeing some projects come online doing that. And I'll let someone else further.
I'll just add that the power score right now, we don't really have enough data on it to compare natural gas usage and efficiency to other fuel sources, and we are about to get some public dollars that will help us expand our power score tool to include all fuels, including generators, renewables, natural gas, propane, etc. We can actually do some analysis on that. So I'll just leave it at that, as well as water and waste.
Let me tie these two questions together, and it might be our final questions. Let's see. I love this question. What steps should growers first take to explore opportunities to be more efficient? And then kind of going along that, are there strategies that are being used to facilitate and strengthen the relationships between utilities and growers?
Yeah, this is Adam from Energy Trust, and from my perspective, we want growers calling us. Obviously, it's something that we're going to be able to influence the design of a facility earlier. We also have some rules that you can't order equipment until we've had a chance to assess the measure and show our influence on the project. We issue an incentive offer, so we want to talk with the growers first. And in terms of the second part of that question, I think it's just the interaction. It's just going to where the growers are at, and that's mostly what we're doing is this one-on-one connection. And going to conferences, going to industry events. RII puts on a outreach event series that we sponsor, and that's helped us to reach some new growers in the state. So yeah, it's just trying to just have those conversations and hear from growers and hear them out, and just try to be clear about what we have to offer. And our only agenda is saving energy, and it's a mutually beneficial thing.
I'll say something
This is
very.
Derek, I would agree. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say something brief about the first part of the question, that it's like for any industry, you start by tracking your monthly energy costs, your monthly energy consumption, and then you want to start with the low cost things, of which there's a lot of opportunities to do low cost measures before you even go to the retrofits and getting help from your utility.
And I would just add that is the intent of the Cannabis Power Score tool, is to let growers be empowered to understand their own facility and how it compares to other facilities. And then once they have that, to connect to resources that can help them be more efficient, like their utility, like the peer-reviewed case studies that we have, and like our events.
Do you have any follow-up thoughts on how the energy efficiency industry could help engage growers in the early phases in order to get to them at the right time so that you don't have to do retrofits later?
That's a great question. I mean, it needs to be. They need to be focusing on conversation at the hookup conversation. Efficiency plus.
Yeah.
I think more utilities need to offer the kind of design assistance that Energy Trust does. That would be helpful.
Right. Okay, let's wrap up there. Lots of good questions, and thank you for those excellent presentations. Thank you to all of you who listened in as well, and definitely reach out to Neil and the other speakers if you have follow-up questions. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.